our link to today's slides, so feel free to join along with us. Today, we're going to be talking about empowering inclusive learning, and Alicia is going to be recording this session. So if you want to turn off your camera for any reason you don't want to be on the recording, feel free to do so as well. We're going to be talking today about leveraging ed tech to meet UDL 3.0 guidelines. My name is Carrie Lane, and I am a project specialist with the ed tech team at the San Diego County Office of Education, and I'm here with my director of ed tech, Alicia Gallegos Butters. She's going to be helping to moderate the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. A little bit about me. I am a project specialist, as I mentioned. Before working at the county, I taught third grade and also middle school English. I have a master's degree in educational technology and also an assistive technology certification. And one of my biggest passions is looking at accessibility and how educational technology and assistive technology can support our students. I put in here some contact and the link to today's resources. If you have any questions or want more information, feel free to contact me and I can share out or brainstorm with you. And for our upcoming events, our team has a lot going on this month. We have tomorrow Tech-Driven Health Innovations. This is going to be part of our Ed Tech for Good series, which I am leading. It's a virtual session, and we'll be exploring project-based learning for math and science classrooms with a focus on health. That's tomorrow from 4 to 5. The registration is in there. On October 24th, my colleague Jessica is doing Ed Tech for Littles, which is robotics, coding, and computational thinking. Additionally, on the 22nd, we have our Curious About, which is the topic of quantum computing and AI in education. That's led by Pamela Rabin, and it should be really interesting about upcoming kind of changes and advances in AI and also quantum computing. And if you're interested in AI, we also have a session called Ready to Go Ready Made Slides for small group exploration, which is on October 30th. And so that's going to be where my colleague Pam shares information about ways that you can get started using AI. She has some really great activities that you can bring into your classroom. We also have here our EdTech website and a calendar of events. I always like to leave this up on the screen just for a couple of minutes. With any of our accessibility sessions, we always want to point out that if students that you're working with have specific disabilities, it's best to contact specialists who support 504s and IEPs, and also the student's family before implementing tools and strategies. And also make sure to check in with your district before utilizing tools and programs that are shared, because districts have different digital resources that they support based on reliability and also privacy for students. So as we move through, just know that. And with that, we'll dive into our learning outcomes. So how many of you are familiar with what UDL is? You can put a thumbs up or a yes in the chat, whatever works for you. If you are on camera, you can also just put a thumbs up. Okay. So I've got quite a few yeses here, which is great. Now, of those of you who are familiar with UDL, how many of you are also familiar with the new updates that came in July of this year? So it's just changed to UDL 3.0. Okay, a couple people are. So that's what we're going to be exploring today, the guidelines in general and also the new ones that have been added into it. And we'll look specifically at technology tools and strategies that you can use to support UDL and build an inclusive classroom. So some of the things to think about as we're working through today. In general, our educational spaces today have highly diverse learners. And as such, we need to think about it that curriculum should be designed to meet the diversity of our learners. UDL is a really great way to do that because it helps to create inclusive content before you create it for your students. And that makes it a little bit easier for us as educators to create it at the beginning, but it also ensures that we are teaching towards all of our learners and making sure that everyone has access to meaningful and challenging learning opportunities. I'm going to play this little video. You may be familiar with it, but it talks about how in UDL you are designing to the edges. It's a bowling analogy, and I think it's a really great way to showcase how important transforming inclusive education is. And here we go.
Why don't we go bowling? So let's talk about bowling. You have 10 pins, you have 2 balls, and you have a lane. The goal is to knock down as many pins as you can. But if you don't get them all, it's okay because you have another chance. But when I bowl and roll the ball down the middle and I don't knock them all down, what often ends up happening to me is that there's 2 pins left standing on either end and they stare at you. It's the 7-10 split and it's the hardest shot in bowling. How is bowling like teaching? The ball was the lesson, the pins are the kids. We aim for the middle, we do the best we can. The pins that are left standing, we often have another chance to kind of get to them, but at the end of the day, those 2 pins that are staring, looking at you, are kids who need the most support and are kids who need the most challenge. So we end up choosing one, and the other one is left standing. I just took all the fun out of bowling. Now, I don't know how many times you've watched professional bowling, but I spent an afternoon watching professional bowling, and let me tell you, there was not one bowler who rolled that ball down the middle of the lane. They throw the ball down the lane at a curve. And I was actually really curious about this, so I called up a professional bowler. He was so excited. I don't think he gets a lot of calls about education. He said the reason why the ball has to enter at a curve is because you will knock down more pins and create a bigger domino effect if you enter at that angle. But in order to do that, you have to change your aim. In order to knock down the most pins with one shot, he aims for the pins that are the hardest to hit. Now let's just let this sink in for a second. We are taught to teach the head pins. We are not taught to teach to the kids who are the furthest and the hardest to get to, the kids with autism, the kids with Down syndrome. The part that's critical here, and it really aligns with Universal Design for Learning, is that so often the supports that we design for those kids on the outside of the lane are actually supports that all of the kids need. This is the part we need to understand if inclusive education is going to move forward in Canada. How can we?
And of course, we are not in Canada, but I really do feel like that video explains so well the practices of building an inclusive classroom and the mindset that we can use if we are planning on using Universal Design for Learning to start to create for the edges by removing barriers and developing opportunities for our students. Does anyone want to unmute and share or write anything about what you thought of the video in the chat? I'll just give a couple of minutes in case anyone wants to share out. It is. It's a great video. I think it really touches on something that is so pivotal in our classrooms. Okay, so when we're thinking about building inclusive classrooms, the main thing to think about first is the why. And there are a lot of reasons. So the first one is it makes our students more motivated and interested. If we are creating a classroom where all students feel like they matter and their needs are met, they're going to be more interested and motivated to learn. It also allows them to build their confidence and take ownership of their learning, which takes some of the pressure off of us as educators to always be the sage on the stage. It can help to develop a strong sense of community, and a lot of the new UDL add-ons really do focus on community and welcoming, and so it's that piece that can help to create our classrooms that feel welcoming and engaging and like everybody belongs. There are really great ways to create pathways for learner success. They can increase student productivity, they can increase student study skills, and also by doing so, increase student grades. And we'll touch on some of the UDL guidelines that support study skills and things like that. And it's a great way to provide true differentiations and tailor your instructions while still thinking about this before you create your content, so that you have less to do for each individual learner after the fact and more to think about for the learners ahead of time. And we're just going to watch a video. I know a lot of you said that you are familiar with UDL, but for anyone who isn't familiar with UDL overall, I just want to play this quick video so you have an understanding of what it is.
This teacher needs to meet a curriculum goal, and she's got a very diverse group of students. And so does this teacher. And this one. Most do. In fact, research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. What does this mean for teachers of today? Classrooms are highly diverse, and curriculum needs to be designed from the start to meet this diversity. Universal Design for Learning is an approach to curriculum that minimizes barriers and maximizes learning for all students. Whoa, that's a fancy term. Universal Design for Learning. Let's unpack it a bit. Let's think about the word universal. By universal, we mean curriculum that can be used and understood by everyone. Each learner in a classroom brings her own background, strengths, needs, and interests. Curriculum should provide genuine learning opportunities for each and every student. Now let's think about the word learning. Learning is not one thing. Neuroscience tells us that our brains have three broad networks. One for recognition, the what of learning, one for skills and strategies, the how of learning, and one for caring and prioritizing, the why of learning. Students need to gain knowledge, skills, and enthusiasm for learning, and a curriculum needs to help them do all three. But every learner is unique, and one size does not fit all. So how do we make a curriculum that challenges and engages diverse learners? This is where the word design comes in. A universally designed building is planned to be flexible and to accommodate all kinds of users, with and without disabilities. It turns out that if you design for those in the margins, your building works better for everyone. Curb cuts and ramps are used by people in wheelchairs, people with strollers, and people on bikes. Captioning on TV serves people who are deaf, people learning English, people in gyms, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. UDL takes this idea and applies it to the design of flexible curriculum. UDL goes beyond access because we need to build in support and challenge. So how do we use the UDL framework to make learning goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone? First, ask yourself, what is my goal? What do I want my students to know, do, and care about? Then ask, what barriers in the classroom might interfere with my diverse students reaching these goals? To eliminate the barriers, use the 3 UDL principles to create flexible paths to learning so that each student can progress. Number 1, provide multiple means of representation. Present content and information in multiple media and provide varied supports. Use graphics and animation, highlight the critical features, activate background knowledge, and support vocabulary so that students can acquire the knowledge being taught. Number 2, provide multiple means of action and expression. Give students plenty of options for expressing what they know and provide models, feedback, and supports for their different levels of proficiency. Number 3, provide multiple means of engagement. What fires up one student won't fire up another. Give students choices to fuel their interests and autonomy. Help them risk mistakes and learn from them. If they love learning, they will persist through challenges. And remember, always keep in mind the learning goal. Get rid of barriers caused by the curriculum and keep the challenge where it belongs. And that's it. Okay, quick recap. Show the information in different ways, allow your students to approach learning tasks and demonstrate what they know in different ways, and offer options that engage students and keep their interest. Universal Design for Learning equals learning opportunities for all.
All right, and now our training's done, since it summed it up so well. No, just kidding. But it is a really good video that I think sums up and encapsulates all that UDL is. And so from there, I won't touch too much on all of the slides that just explain UDL, but they are here for you. So just understanding that the learning brain has 3 different networks, and those networks focus on the what, the why, and the how. And so that's how we're going to break through today on the different things that we explore. And that the main things to think about as you design universally are creating multiple means of engagement, representation, action and expression, and then designing your instructional goals, assessments, methods, and materials universally. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to share with you today, and I'll put these links in the chat, but they're also in your PowerPoint. There are two really useful things on this slide here. The first one is a self-reflection checklist. And so here, if you're just kind of starting to use Universal Design for Learning and you want to think about some of the considerations that you might want to touch on in your classroom, this is a really, really comprehensive list of how you can provide multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression. So it gives you a lot of different things to think about. And of course, you don't have to do all of them, but maybe integrating one or two of them as you're thinking about incorporating UDL. The other thing I want to share, and I said I would share this link in the chat. The other thing that I'd like to share with you is this AI tool that is specifically for UDL. It's called Ludia, and I will put that in the chat as well. And it's an AI-powered UDL partner. So if you are thinking about what grade you teach and what subject you teach and some of your learning goals, you can use this tool to then think about the different UDL guidelines. And so, for example, if I put in here, and of course my captions are blocking my, as is this, I'm just going to minimize it really quickly. If I put in here something that I'm trying to teach, for example, 8th grade English, and my learning goals to teach persuasive thesis statements, and some design challenges I have are that I have English learners who don't write at grade level. I also have a student who has hand flexibility issues, things like that. I can put this in and it will start to put in the considerations and then suggestions for me to think about to meet multiple means of different engagement, action and expression, etc. So we do have another training all about AI and accessibility, and I won't go into this too much, but does anyone want to share anything that they think that might be useful about this tool that they could use for their classroom? All right. Well, then we will move on to an example. And this was shared by a math coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Education. And it really explains how you can start to think about UDL from the beginning of your design. So in this case, a teacher is designing an All About Me activity, and the purpose of the activity is at the beginning to build community in their classroom. So before they think about exactly how they want to create this activity, they have to start thinking about, in the UDL method, what are some potential barriers? So some of the ones that they came up with were the fact that students might need to write. Depending on the grade level, this might be challenging. Cutting skills, again, depending on the grade level, that might be challenging. Might be difficult for people to draw, to color. A rigid prompt might make it difficult. And then, are there any other options or opportunities for your students who might have trouble with that? And so some of the things that you could do, you could consider digital options, pre-cut, maybe templates. You could use other media, or you could have them do an oral share out to talk about themselves. And so as they're creating this activity, they're thinking about that learning goal and the purpose, and then what barriers and opportunities they might have. Here, there's a link to other scenarios to help you think through this, but we're just going to take about 5 minutes and we are going to select a learning context that's relevant to your own work and then identify potential barriers that might come up in that context and then how you could create options or opportunities. And since we have so many AI tools out there now, if you want a leg up on just kind of thinking through some of these options, AI is really helpful for that. So I am going to actually preview one of the tools that I recommend to meet the UDL guidelines as our timer. And so this is a tool called Classroom Screen. And I really enjoy it because it provides a timer, but it also has things that can help your learners as they're working. So it has a schedule you can add to it. It has also a sound level measurer so that you can keep a steady sound level and not go above maximum noises. And it has other things like a random name puller and things like that. So I'm going to leave this up and set the timer for 5 minutes. And during that time, think about your subject that you maybe teach or the context in which you work. What are some barriers to an activity that you might do with your students or the people with whom you work? And then what are some opportunities to change that activity or give options for that activity to make it more accessible? If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to unmute or share them in the chat too. And I'm just going to mute myself while you're all working. You can write this down or just think about it in your heads. And then if anyone is willing to, we'll have a little share out afterwards. All right. Hope, I saw you just joined. We are doing an activity where we're thinking about what is the learning context that you are choosing? What are some of the potential barriers for the people who might be learning about what you're teaching? And also, what are some other alternative options you can provide to reduce those barriers? And so I see in the chat from James that delivering SAI in small groups in an online independent study program presents a real challenge. The students are at various levels of unique learning needs, and you want to focus on written expressions. So, James, do you have any potential options that you can come up with, or is that a question that you'd like to maybe share with everybody else to see if anyone else can chime in?
Well, I'd love to hear other people's ideas, and I'm excited about the AI tool that you just shared with us on delivering UDL. I've been using School AI and experimenting with guiding students writing using that, and that helps to address the different needs of the students and where they are, and they can work on that in the small group setting without me having to set them up into separate breakout rooms, which is a challenge because I'm only one person. But yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I hope I didn't misunderstand the instructions. I didn't mean to share that at group level like that, but yeah, if anybody has any ideas for me, I'd be so open.
No, that's exactly what we were going to do for the share out I was going to ask everyone to share out, or not everyone, but anyone who wanted to share out what their learning context is, some of the challenges, and then if you had some, options that you already thought of, that's great, but asking for help is excellent as well. So I will leave that open to the group for written expressions to meet the various levels of proficiency and learning needs. And I will also say that, as you mentioned, there are a lot of AI tools. One of them, Magic School AI, has tools that are specific to creating scaffolds. They have tools for creating UDL choice boards, which one of them we'll share today. They also have ones with creating models of exemplars and non-exemplars. And then the UDL tool I shared, the UDL AI tool I shared before would work for that as well. And I think also as we move through our PowerPoint today, I'll be sure to point out some of the other things I think might be good for you. But I will pause to see if anyone else has any suggestions or wants to share out their challenges. And if you do, you can feel free to put them in the chat or unmute. All right, well, the chat is open, so if anyone does want to add, we can interject into the session, but I will move on. And we're going to start off the way that I structured the rest of this presentation is that we're going to look at each of the different networks. And so first we're going to start with the affective network, and that's the why of learning. And as I mentioned before, the why of learning relates to interest and motivation. So as we're thinking about how to keep our students interested in what we're teaching and motivated to continue learning, some of the things that influence the affective network are neurology, culture, relevance, subjectivity, and background knowledge. And so as we move through, these are some things to think about that may cause your learners to shut down or to be more engaged than they otherwise would. And one other little tool that I want to point out, and this works for all of the different networks, but I've linked to each of these slides a UDL resource flip kit. And so with this, when you click on this link, which I will share in the chat as well, you can then select a strand, and it, for example, says engagement, and then you can pick a digital tool or a teaching strategies section. If you do digital tools, it will recommend different tools that might increase student engagement with the content or build their background knowledge, things like that. So it focuses specifically on that network, and it gives you different resources for digital tools. And if you do teaching strategies, it hones it down even further. And then you can select those, and it will give you strategies for welcoming interests, for sustaining effort and persistence. So each of these networks you can access this flip kit for. And we're going to start off with the welcoming interests and identities. So this is one of the considerations under the affective network, the Y in learning. And as I mentioned, I have throughout the rest of this PowerPoint tables for you. The titles of the tables are linked to the specific UDL guideline, so you can read them. And as you go through these UDL guidelines, you can click into each piece, and they give you detailed instructions or things to think about to meet the guidelines. And then what I put in here are strategies that come to mind to meet the criteria, and then tools and resources. And I will preview a few of these. I might also point out ones that, for example, might help with writing prompts or something like that, or anything else that came up in the chat based on questions that people have. But other than that, they're all here for you to explore, and there are a lot to work with. So just kind of have fun with it. We already looked at Classroom Screen, which, like I said, was good for providing movement opportunities because it has a little timer, and it has whether you can be up out of your seat. It has noise monitoring. So things like that we'll kind of go through. I'll pick a few that I want to show you, but all of them are here for each strategy. So before I get started on that, I just want to see, I saw a couple of things in the chat. So we've got some suggestion for flexible writing tools, peer review, proficiency level differentiation, formative assessments. Yes, read and write we will talk about too today, absolutely. And I'm not sure if, Eduardo, can you, if you have a chance, share what Chrome extension, what is the name of that Chrome extension, or is it just all Chrome extensions? I'll pause on that one and see if you respond. Anyway, so for welcoming interest and identities, especially if you're thinking about the writing or the reading classroom, there are programs that can create different opportunities for reading and for writing. Of course, there's AI that can create different prompts, but I also like the Scholastic Story Starters. It's kind of a fun one that you can use with students because it's like a little choice wheel, and as you're doing the choices, it will have different types of writing and then different story starters for them. Thank you, Eduardo, for sharing that link. I'll open that as well so people can see. Perfect. So this is a nice, robust resource as well. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So our story starters is loading. As it does, I will move into a couple of the others. And so as you'll see with this, some of the strategies to optimize choice are things like utilizing decision trees or wheels, allowing kids to self-select things, and working with collaborative learning goals. So if, for example, you're using Google Docs or Microsoft, a great way to do this is to have students working with their learning goals with you and collaborative editing together, writing comments, and having each other see them. So you might be doing some of these things already, and they are UDL activities. For creating relevance, value, and authenticity, I put on here project-based learning. That's a really great way to make things more relevant to students. And there's this AI here called PBL Buddy. It makes it really easy. You just enter your subject and a project idea, and it creates an entire lesson plan for you that's project-based, super quick. This one's not loading, but I will come back to it. And then UDL choice boards. So choice boards provide multiple choices for ways to meet the learning goal. And Magic School AI has one of these where you just put in your grade level. And then if you want to put in, modalities or a little bit of information about your learners, you can do that. And then you hit generate. And it will create all different types of assignments that you can put into your own choice board. And later in the slides, I share with you some templates of creating your choice boards. So while this creates the text and the ideas for it, there are also some places where you can find choice board templates. So then nurturing joy and play is the third one in welcoming interests and identities. And a great way to do this are some of those get to know you activities you might already be doing, opportunities for storytelling, and also community bell ringers. So if you're having your students come in, a lot of us will give activities that relate to math or to science or to English. One of the nice things that you can do if you just have a couple of extra minutes is ask a question that gets students thinking or telling stories about themselves, something that might be a little bit funny or interesting, like would you rather only eat with a fork or only eat with a spoon? It teaches kids something about themselves and it gives them something that's non-academic to relate to. And the more you do these with students, the more open they become. So it doesn't always have to be tech-based, but there are quite a few different ways that you can use technology. I have linked here some newspaper templates. There's a link to writing portfolios and how to get your students started with those. Later, as our closing activity, we'll do a Padlet I Can't Draw, which will give you an idea of how you could use Padlet to do a fun bell ringer. And then, as I mentioned before, reducing distractions as well as threats and biases is really important for welcoming your students' identities and interests. And so I provided in here a few resources for that, as well as resources to create picture or visual schedules with your students. I'll pause for a second just to see if anyone has any questions about anything or if anyone would like some suggestions that are specific to their context for welcoming your students. Okay. So for this one, we have sustaining effort and persistence. And the thing to think about with this specific guideline is that it really focuses on making sure that your students don't feel defeated by the work that they're given. So what's going to motivate them to continue to keep trying? And one of those things is making sure that you clarify the meaning and the purpose of what they're doing. And also you create scaffolds that make it so that they can do things in manageable chunks. And so I put in here a link to something called First Then. It's templates to help you create visual first, then, next steps for your students, as well as this assignment scaffolder that is also a Magic School AI. Magic School has a lot of things that are useful for teachers. And this one will allow you to take an assignment and break it down into manageable steps. So you can use that. Another way to do it is to use Chrome extensions or programs such as the Immersive Reader or Read and Write to provide supports to your students as they're learning. And we'll preview one of those a little bit later, and we will also discuss a ton of Chrome extensions and apps in a future training. Also, this is a good place to include simulations, manipulatives, things like that we'll go into a little bit later too. Fostering collaboration, interdependence, and collective learning. So this is having students work together to collaborate on their work because this helps them to learn better, but also to make meaning of their learning so that they want to continue to try. Accountability partners are a great resource for this. So if you're having students work on collaborative documents, that's great. I also put in here a link to free peer tutoring. And then the next one, 8.4, is fostering belonging and community. So how are you going to make your students feel like they belong in the community of your classroom? And one of the things that's really nice for this one is to have students create podcasts. They can be really informal and short. We even have kindergartners who do podcasts, so it's definitely doable. Have them podcast about their families, what influences them, their communities. And so I linked here to some podcast resources. And 8.5 is providing action-oriented feedback. So a lot of times as we are teaching, we give, feedback, formative feedback right away, but sometimes we take a little longer to grade things. So some of the things that you can think about with feedback are using video, audio, or comments as you're kind of going through their working documents. I linked here to mastery-oriented feedback, but I also put in here links for screencasting programs, because one thing that I really liked to do when I was teaching was to screencast myself as I was going through a student's paper. This way I could just talk to them and go through the changes or the feedback that I wanted to give them. And so I wasn't taking as much time to do one thing and then have to do the next thing. I was able to just do the feedback while I was going through it. Another thing you can use, there's a program called Brisk Teaching, and that one is an AI program that helps you to give working feedback as you are looking through Google Documents that your students create. So those are all good. And I see questions in the chat. Do a lot of these programs require subscription or purchase tokens to use extensively? So Magic School, I believe, from everything I've seen, they're pretty robust on what they provide for free. I do think they have a premium version, which is through the upgrade, but they allow you to do so many things without the subscription. In terms of anything else that I put on here, unless it was a link to like a list of things you can use, which some of those might have, paid versions that are extensive. For the most part, if I put something on here, the free version will allow you to do what you need to do. So, for example, Loom has a free version, Screencastify has a 5-minute free version. Of course, if you're already using Google or Microsoft, then your school has a plan. So a lot of these things are free or freemium with very good options that you can still use. I really do try to not put anything that would be cost prohibited on here. And for the third portion of reaching your learner's why, it's building up emotional capacity. And for this one, it's recognizing expectations, beliefs, and motivations. And so this is really coming up with ways to empower your students to feel like they can do it. So I linked to something called the Can Do It experience. Additionally, creating goals that incorporate strengths and weaknesses. And so yet again, there is our Magic School has a SMART goals tracker that can look at student goals, and you can even put in there incorporating strengths and weaknesses. Very useful. I also put in here some SEL and self-regulation resources. This is useful for helping students to develop awareness of themselves and others. The next consideration is promoting reflection, both individually and collectively. And so I put in here some self-reflection questions for students, but also a great place to do this is with Google Forms or Google Sheets. Just having students do quick formative assessments about the content, but also about things that they're thinking, their metacognition. And you can have that organized into either forms or into sheets that they just keep track of and think about depending on their age. And then for consideration 9.4, it's cultivate empathy and restorative practices. And so I put in here a list of restorative questions. I also put in here a link to an empathy map. And with this empathy map, It's a really good place for you to think about your learners and what they're thinking and feeling. What do they do? What are some of their challenges? What are some things they're really good at? But also, if you want your students to think empathetically and to build community, they can do this about each other. And so this is just a copy that you can make another copy of and use with your students or for your students. Okay, before we move into multiple means of representation, which is the what of learning, want to check and see whether anyone has any questions. Okay. So for our what of learning, our recognition network, it really talks about how learners perceive and comprehend information. And some of the things that influence this are sensory disabilities, the way that students learn, cultural differences, and the primary language spoken. Again, we have that link to the resources that Flip Kit. And then when you're thinking about perception, this is where we dive into some of the more web accessibility considerations. So thinking about checking your content as you create it. And some of you may be using Canva. Canva recently added a really nice web accessibility checker that you can use to make sure that you have alternative text for students, that the contrast is good. PDF, there's a PDF Make Accessible tool that will walk you through making your content accessible. Microsoft has a phenomenal accessibility checker that looks at whether you have table headers, whether you have alt text, whether you have duplicate slide titles. Just as a little tip, for me, we tend to use Google more, but I always download it as Microsoft and check the accessibility of all my presentations before I upload them or put them back into Google, just because the accessibility checker in Microsoft is so awesome. Grackle Docs, if your school or district allows it, is Google's way of checking accessibility, but we at the county don't have access to that. So that's one for you. And if you have a website that you share with students, you can check that using the Wave Web Aim tool. I put on here also for 1.2, supporting multiple ways to perceive information. So using alternative text, and alternative text is when you add text-based information to pictures so that somebody is able to, for example, use a screen reader and hear what the picture is of, even if they can't see the picture. And also a link to how to create captions in YouTube. You may also notice as I'm presenting today, I have the captions on in Zoom. One of the nice things that has changed in the last few years is that almost all programs you use will have captions, live captioning as you're speaking. So if you want to, you can always have live caption options in PowerPoint, Google, Zoom, Teams, anything like that, so that your students who might need those captions can see them. And 1.3 is represent a diversity of perspectives and identities in authentic ways. And I linked here to layered text sets. And so this, what you would do is if you're teaching a certain content, you provide different types of media that students can engage with that showcase multiple perspectives. So for example, if you're teaching about the Civil War, you can have from the perspective of the North, you can have from the perspective of the South, you can have from the perspective of different people who are involved in it in different types. So food that was related to the Civil War. And this provides a great opportunity for you to embed multiple different types of content and perspectives into your classroom organically. The second one that is with this network is thinking about languages and symbols. And so here, some of the considerations are clarifying vocabulary, symbols, and language structures, as well as mathematical notations, text, and symbols. So I put on here a number of links for you, and the one I do want to preview for today is Read and Write Picture Dictionary and Rewordify. So I'm going to pull over. our screen right here. It's just an article. And what I want to show you is first, if I highlight a word on an article that is on the web, and I have my read and write, which is free for teachers, enabled, I can go to this picture dictionary and it will pop up with the word and a little picture to represent the word. It also has a ton of other tools we won't go into today. And then what I really love is this rewordify feature, which takes what it thinks of as challenging words and it highlights, or sorry, it italicizes them and changes them. So now instead of having compendium, which might be difficult for students, it changes it to big collection. And so this could be really, really helpful for your students if you are using this tool that is free for teachers. And I have a link that I'll share in the chat in case you're interested in the free for teacher option. Another thing that's useful with language and symbols is to think about how to cultivate understanding and respect languages and dialects. There are some resources there for translation options. And also making sure to address biases in use of language and symbols. And so providing multiple language options is really important. There are things in, for example, Google Docs where you can go right in and translate an entire document within moments. That is super useful for a lot of the languages, and depending on how common that language is, the technology is pretty good for translation. But I also put on here if you have a student who is blind or low vision, or a student who is might use ASL. I have here the HandTalk app is an ASL translator, and here is a Braille translator, so you can have multiple language options. And then presenting concepts through multiple media. And so here I just put in things like using ebooks, PowerPoint screen recording, podcasts, Canva, Adobe Express, lots of different tools that you and your students can use to explain concepts. And for you, this might be a useful way to teach some of your learners who otherwise might not understand. Okay. And the last one for this network is building knowledge. So how can you work on supporting knowledge by, for example, connecting to prior knowledge? And so a great thing to do here is use digital KWL charts. Also on here, I have some links to graphic organizers and something called a text-based graphic organizer, which is really useful. I put a link here to a way to create exemplars and non-exemplars. And then other things that are useful, creating multiple ways of making meaning by removing distractions and chunking. There are some strategies such as the Pomodoro technique that help you to focus on your work and then remove all distractions. And after you've done that for 25 minutes, you get a 5-minute break. So this is a really cool Chrome app that does that. And I put a link here to the Cognitive Learning Strategies course. We developed it at SDCOE, and it talks about ways that you can teach your students how to be learners that are able to transfer and generalize their learning. Any questions on that one? Okay. And the last one that we're going to talk about today is the how of learning. And this is the action and expression. So how can your students express what they know? And this is influenced by how students are able to move, how they're able to organize themselves, potentially language barriers. And this one is another one that it comes back to web accessibility, where you want to think about ways that you design your website, but also actually your classroom, so universal design of spaces. And you want to think about making things keyboard navigable or testing out all of your content to make sure that they can use it without a mouse. I put a link here to something called click-free browsing, which allows you to navigate your screen without actually clicking on a mouse. For expression and communication, this is the big one for this network, and this is providing multiple means for communicating. I put on here slides Q&A mode, which is a great way if you just put slides into Q&A mode, which I can show you at the very end. You are able then to have your students have a back channel talk while you are presenting to them, and it collects their conversation. I put on Padlet. You can have students create comics, memes, avatars. In here, there are a lot of math options for differentiation, but also for manipulatives that you can check out. And then some templates for creating choice boards. And I put on here a back channel as well as a random name picker that you can think about when you're thinking about equitable calling strategies and equitable ways to make sure that all of your students have an opportunity to talk. And the last one for this action and expression network is to have your students create strategies that will help them to communicate. So setting meaningful goals. I put in here a goal worksheet as well as an AI tool that we'll explore in the next session that helps to chunk different information. Additionally, you want to learn how to prioritize and teach kids how to prioritize their projects and objectives. So I put in here some more strategies for prioritizing as well as some tools for creating to-do lists. Also here, I put in a course that we created at SDCOE called Work Smarter, Not Harder, that has strategies for prioritizing and working efficiently, good for students and for us. Organizing information, so teaching your students how to be organized using their Google Drive, their Microsoft OneDrive. This might include using color coding. Both programs have color coding, or using something like a Google Keep. And then monitoring progress. So anything that you can do to create formative assessments or collaborative commenting. I put in here also polling tools. And challenge exclusionary practices. There's a link here to Shadowing a Learner Challenge, which allows you to kind of walk in your students' shoes to experience some of the challenges and exclusions that they might be experiencing while they're in school, so that you can reframe the way that you work on your curriculum and UDL design. So with that, we have our Wow How Now, which is just if anyone has any questions. I know toward the end I went a little fast, but if you have any questions or things that you're excited to try out. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to quickly show you how you would put this into Q&A mode, which once you are out of slideshow mode, you just go to presenter view. And then there's this really nice audience tools, and you start new. And then you can share a link with anyone. So like I would share this with all of you, and then you could participate by asking questions into my back channel on my slides. All right. I don't think we have time for the Padlet activity, but if you want to check it out just for fun, you're welcome to. And I will leave up here our upcoming accessibility sessions that we will be having in November and then again in March and May. And I'll stay on for a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions, and we'll stop talking if anyone wants to unmute and share.